Ifeoma Adebayo had always lived a life of privilege, growing up in the bustling city of Lagos with her wealthy parents, Adewale and Chidinma Adebayo. She had been given the best of everything: elite education, opulent comforts, and a carefully planned future. But there was one expectation she found impossible to fulfill: marrying Kunle, her childhood friend. Kunle was a perfect match in her parents' eyes. He was charming, came from a prominent family, and had been a fixture in their social circle for years. But Ifeoma's heart had no interest in Kunle. Instead, she had fallen for Kofi Mensah, a brilliant and compassionate medical doctor. One evening at dinner, Ifeoma decided to tell her parents about Kofi. "Mom, Dad, there is someone I've been seeing," Ifeoma began nervously. Chidinma's eyes light up. "Oh, is it Kunle? He's such a fine young man." "No, it's not Kunle," Ifeoma said firmly. "His name is Kofi. He's a medical doctor." Adewale frowned. "Kofi? Where is he from?" "Ghana," Ifeoma replied. The room fell into an easy silence. Chidinma's expression darkened and Adewale's jaw tightened. "Ifeoma," Chidinma said sharply, "haven't you learned anything from Victoria's mistake? You know what happened when she married someone who wasn't from our world." "Kofi isn't like that," Ifeoma argued. "He's hardworking, kind, and has no interest in my money." "We don't care," Adewale said bluntly. "You marry Kunle. He's the right choice for you, and we won't discuss this again." Over the next few months, Ifeoma tried to balance her love for Kofi with her parents' disapproval. But the more they pushed her to end things, the more determined she became to prove them wrong. One day, her parents delivered a final warning. "Ifeoma, if you don't end this relationship, you will no longer be welcome in this house." Chidinma said coldly. "I can't believe you disown me over this," Ifeoma replied, tears in her eyes. "It's for your own good," Adewale said. "You will thank us later." After learning of Ifeoma's feelings for Kofi, Kunle intensified his efforts to win her over. He started visiting the Adebayo's house more frequently, always under the guise of casual meetings. "Ifeoma," Kunle said one afternoon, handing her a bouquet of flowers, "you deserve someone who can give you the life you are used to. I care about you more than anyone." Ifeoma forced a polite smile, but quickly changed the subject. She appreciated Kunle's persistence, but her heart belonged to Kofi. Despite her lack of interest, Kunle did not give up. He invited her to dinners, brought her gifts, and even tried to connect with her through shared childhood memories. But Ifeoma remained distant, her thoughts always drifting back to Kofi. One day, Ifeoma decided to visit Kofi's apartment after missing him for several days. When she arrived, she was met with surprising news. "Oh, Kofi," the landlord said, "he doesn't live here anymore. He moved out last week." Ifeoma's heart sank. She tried calling his phone, but the number was no longer in service. Confused and hurt, she returned to the apartment several times over the next few weeks, hoping for answers, but the story was always the same. Kofi had disappeared without a trace. Seeing Ifeoma's heart break, Kunle saw an opportunity to step in. He did everything in his power to cheer her up, taking her to an exclusive restaurant, gifting her a luxury car and surprising her with expensive jewelry and designer bags. Ifeoma, I just want you to be happy, Kunle said during one of their outings. I will never stop trying to show you how much I care. Slowly, Ifeoma began to soften. She saw a side of Kunle she hadn't noticed before: his patience, his determination, and his unwavering support. Over time, she started to believe that his love might be genuine. After months of persistence, Kunle finally won Ifeoma's heart. She realized that he had been there for her through one of the most challenging periods of her life and never once gave up on her. When Kunle proposed, Ifeoma accepted, believing she had found someone who truly loved her. They began planning their wedding with their parents' full support, the promise of a grand ceremony and a secure future ahead. Ifeoma and Kunle's wedding had been a grand affair, the union her parents had always dreamed of. The Adebayo's family was proud to see their daughter with a man they believed was perfect for her, and for a while, Ifeoma convinced herself that she was truly happy. But the glow of newly bliss began to fade all too quickly. The cracks in their marriage started small. Kunle often stayed out late with his friends, leaving Ifeoma home alone. He ignored all of her requests for help around the house, dismissing her concerns with an air of entitlement. One night, Ifeoma confronted him when he stumbled in past midnight, reeking of alcohol. Kunle, we need to talk, Ifeoma began, her voice trembling. You can't keep coming home this late and leaving me to handle everything alone. Handle what alone? Kunle scoffed. You are not working anymore, Ifeoma. What's so hard about keeping the house in order? His voice stung, but Ifeoma persisted. That doesn't mean you get to treat me like a maid. Marriage is a partnership. The argument escalated, voice raising until Kunle's patience snapped. In a moment of rage, he slapped Ifeoma, sending her to the ground. Ifeoma sat there, stung, her cheeks burning from the impact. Tears streamed down her face as she looked up to the man who had vowed to love her forever. Don't ever question me again, Kunle warned before storming off to their bedroom. That night marked the beginning of a dark chapter in Ifeoma's life. Kunle's temper flared more frequently, and the slightest mistake provoked his wrath. If dinner wasn't ready on time or the house wasn't spotless, he would lash out, both verbally and physically. Ifeoma lived in constant fear, carefully tiptoeing around her husband to avoid his anger. Her once bright smile faded, replaced by a quiet sadness that her family failed to notice. During Kunle's lavish birthday celebration, Ifeoma's parents came to the house, eager to see their daughter. Chidima pulled Ifeoma aside to compliment her dress, but froze when she noticed faint bruises on her cheeks and arm. Ifeoma, what happened? Chidima asked, concern marked on her face. Ifeoma's heart raced as Kunle shot her a warning glance from across the room. I I fell, Ifeoma stammered, forcing a weak smile. You know how clumsy I can be. Chidima hesitated, sensing something was off. But Ifeoma's laughter and quick dismissal left her unconcerned. As Kunle's demands grew, Ifeoma found it impossible to keep up with work and the responsibilities at home. Overwhelmed and emotionally drained, she made the difficult decision to resign from her work and dedicate herself entirely to running the household. Ifeoma's isolation might have continued unchecked if not for her friend, Clara. Noticing Ifeoma's unhappiness, Clara invited her out for coffee and pressed her for the truth. Ifeoma, you are not yourself anymore, Clara said gently. What's going on? At first, Ifeoma hesitated, but the dam finally broke. Between sobs, she confessed everything: Kunle's temper, the abuse, and her growing fear for her safety. Kunle, Clara repeated, stung. I can't believe it. Everyone thinks he's a perfect husband. He was, at first, Ifeoma said, her voice barely above a whisper. But now, I feel like I don't know him anymore. You need to leave, Ifeoma, before it's too late. Divorce him. Save yourself. You deserve better than this. Ifeoma nodded, but fear clung on her like a shadow. Could she really walk away from the man her parents had so desperately wanted her to marry? Ifeoma's life took a small but much needed turn for the better when she finally landed a new job. After months of sending out applications, the company was a marketing firm, and her co-workers welcomed her warmly. It felt like a breath of fresh air to be surrounded by people who respected her and valued her work. Her smiles, long absent from her days, began to return. For a while, the job became her sanctuary, a place where she could escape the suffocating toxicity of her marriage. One evening, after work, Ifeoma was running late for her usual bus. A male co-worker, Mark, noticed her standing by the entrance, checking her watch anxiously. Hey, Ifeoma, need a ride? I am heading your way, he offered with a friendly smile. At first, she hesitated, worried about how Kunle would react, but the thought of waiting for the next bus in the chilly evening air made her accept. Thanks, Mark. That's really kind of you, she said, climbing into the passenger seat. Mark dropped her off in front of her house, waving goodbye as he drove away. As Ifeoma turned to walk inside, she noticed Kunle silhouette in the living room window. Her stomach churned. The moment Ifeoma stepped through the door, Kunle confronted her, his voice sharp and accusing. Who is that? He demanded, his eyes blazing with anger. A co-worker, Ifeoma replied calmly. He offered me a ride because I missed my bus. And you thought that was okay? Kunle's voice grew louder. You are out there flaunting yourself to other men, cheating on me. That's not true, Kunle, Ifeoma said, her voice trembling. He's just a colleague trying to help. Kunle didn't listen. His anger boiled over, and he began beating her, calling her a liar and accusing her of infidelity. That night, he didn't allow her to eat, leaving her sobbing and hungry in their room. As always, Kunle's rage subsided, and the following morning he approached Ifeoma with remorseful eyes. I am sorry, Ifeoma. I love you so much. I just, I can't bear the thought of losing you. Please, don't make me angry again. Ifeoma nodded numbly, too tired and scared to argue. She wanted to believe his words, but deep down, she knew this cycle would never end. One night, Ifeoma returned home late from her work. Her phone had died and she hadn't been able to inform Kunle of her delay. As soon as she walked in, Kunle's fury ignited. Where have you been? He shouted. With that guy from work again? Tell me the truth. No, Kunle, Ifeoma pleaded. I had to finish a project. I had deadlines to meet. My phone died and I couldn't call you. Please understand. But her words only forwarded his anger. He accused her of lying and began hitting her harder than ever before. Ifeoma's screams echoed through the house, but no one came to help. By the time Kunle stopped, she was bleeding and unconscious on the floor. Realizing the severity of what he has done, Kunle panicked. Ifeoma, wake up, he cried, shaking her limp body. When she didn't respond, he crumbled to call an ambulance. The paramedics arrived swiftly and rushed Ifeoma to the hospital. As Kunle sat in the waiting room, his mind raced with fear and guilt. He knew he had crossed a line, but he convinced himself it was Ifeoma's fault for pushing him. The doctor approached him hours later, her expression grim. She is stable for now, but the injuries are severe, the doctor said. We will need to keep her under observation. Kunle nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. He knew he had to come up with an explanation before anyone started asking too many questions. Ifeoma's condition was critical when she was rushed to the hospital. The doctors worked tirelessly, performing surgeries to treat internal injuries. She survived the operation, but the trauma was too much for her body to handle. Ifeoma slipped into a coma, her world plunging into darkness. For 3 agonizing months, Ifeoma lay unresponsive in the hospital bed, her parents unaware of the truth. Whenever Adewale or Chidima called to check on their daughter, Kunle always had an excuse. She is still resting, he would say. The doctors advised no visitors for now. Don't worry, I am taking care of her. But in reality, Kunle rarely visited Ifeoma. He couldn't bear to face her fragile form, a stark reminder of his own cruelty. Instead, he spent his days burying himself in work or out with friends, leaving Ifeoma alone in a sterile hospital room. One morning, as the sunlight filtered through the hospital blinds, Ifeoma's eyelid fluttered open. Her body felt heavy, her mind fuggy, but she was alive. Nurses rushed to her side, notifying the doctor and preparing her for evaluation. The news reached Kunle, who begrudgingly made his way to the hospital. When he entered Ifeoma's room, his face was devoid of any genuine remorse. His presence filled the room with a suffocating tension. You are finally awake, he said flatly, standing at the foot of her bed. Ifeoma's chest tightened at the sight of him. Memories of his violence came flooding back. The pain, the fear, and the accusation. Her pulse quickened and her breathing grew shallow. Kunle, she whispered weakly, her voice trembling. He took a step closer, but the mere sight of him was too much. Ifeoma's eyes widened in terror before her body went limp, and she collapsed back into unconsciousness. When Ifeoma opened her eyes again, the stark white walls of the hospital were gone. Instead, she found herself in a familiar setting, the spacious living room of her parents' home. She was lying on the plush, cream-colored sofa, wrapped in a warm blanket. The faint smell of lavender, her mother's favorite scent, lingered in the room. Confusion clouded her mind. How had she gotten here? Ifeoma, darling, her mother's voice broke through her haze. Chidima rushed into the room, tears streaming down her face. Mom, Ifeoma croaked, her throat dry and her voice hoarse. Oh, thank God, Chidima sobbed. You are safe now, sweetheart. We are here for you. Ifeoma's father, Adewale, entered the room, his face lined with worry. We've been trying to reach you for months. What happened? Why didn't you tell us? The weight of their words sank in as Ifeoma tried to piece together what had happened. She realized Kunle was nowhere to be seen, but she couldn't help but feel the lingering shadow of his presence. For the first time in months, Ifeoma felt a flicker of hope. She was back where she belonged, with the people who truly loved her. Mom, I need to tell you something. Chidime's warm smile faded in concern. What is it, sweetheart? Ifeoma took a deep breath. Her hands shaking. Kunle, he hurt me. He hit me, controlled me, and treated me horribly. I was too scared to tell you. Chidima's face twisted in shock and anguish. Oh, Ifoma, why didn't you tell us sooner? I thought I could handle it, Ifoma whispered, tears streaming down her face. I didn't want to disappoint you or make things worse. Her father, Adewale, entered the room just in time to hear her confession. His fist clenched, his face red with anger. That man, how dare he? Ifoma nodded, ashamed. I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to get out. Chidima pulled her daughter into a tight embrace. You don't ever have to apologize for this. Ifoma, we are just glad you are safe now. In the following week, Ifoma filed for divorce from Kunle. Though the process was emotionally draining, she found strength in her family unwavering support. When the divorce was finalized, Ifoma felt a newfound sense of freedom. Years passed, and Ifoma focused on rebuilding her life. She found joy in her work and the love of her family. But life threw another challenge her way when her father's health suddenly declined. Adewale was rushed to the world's best hospital, his condition critical. The doctors informed the family that surgery was the only chance of survival. It was a risky procedure with no guarantees. Ifeoma stayed by her father's side in the hospital, her heart heavy with fear. The surgery was scheduled for the following morning, and the family spent the night in prayer and quiet reflection. When the surgeon finally came out after hours of operating, the family braced themselves for the worst. But the doctor smiled and said, the surgery was a success. Mr. Adewale is stable and recovering well, thanks to one doctor who had been saving lives for the past years. Relief washed over Ifoma as she cried tears of joy. Later that day, she visited her father's room to see him resting peacefully. Ifoma stepped into her father's hospital room with a bouquet of flowers, relieved to see him resting peacefully. Her mother stood by her side, holding his hand, while the room was filled with gratitude and love. I'm so glad you are okay, Dad, Ifoma whispered, squeezing his hand gently. As the family basked in the moment, the door opened and a tall, confident man in a white coat walked in. Ifeoma turned to thank the doctor, but her words caught in her throat when she recognized the face she had never forgotten. Kofi, she gasped, her voice trembling. The man smiled warmly, his eyes meeting hers. Hello, Ifeoma. After exchanging introductions with her parents, Ifeoma pulled Kofi aside into a quiet corner of the hospital. I can't believe it's you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Where have you been all these years? Why did you leave me without saying anything? Kofi sighed, his expression clouded with pain. Ifeoma, I didn't leave you by choice. Kunle threatened me to stay away from you. He made it clear that if I didn't, he would ruin my life. I tried to stay strong, but one night, a group of men came to my apartment to end things permanently. I had to leave. Ifome's eyes widened in shock, her heart breaking at the thought of what he had endured. I am so sorry, Kofi. I had no idea. I should have fought harder for us. Kofi placed a hand on her shoulder. It wasn't your fault. I'm just glad to see you safe and happy now. Ifoma shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. I wasn't happy, Kofi. Not for a long time. Kunle hurt me, and I stayed silent because I thought I had no choice. I regret everything that happened to us. When they returned to the room, Ifeoma's parents were waiting. Chidinma stood and walked towards Kofi. "We owe you an apology, Kofi," she said, her voice tinged with guilt. "We misjudged you all those years ago, and we deeply regret the pain we caused both of you." Adewale nodded, his eyes filled with remorse. "If we had known then what we know now, we would have done things differently. Thank you for saving my life and for being the man we were too blind to see back then." Kofi nodded graciously. "Thank you. Hearing that means more than you know." Over the next few weeks, Kofi and Ifeoma reconnected, catching up on the years they had lost. Old feelings resurfaced, but this time there was no fear, no barriers, only the promise of a future together. One evening, Kofi joined the Adebayo's family for dinner. The atmosphere was warm and welcoming, filled with laughter and hope. As Kofi sat beside Ifeoma at the table, it felt as though he had always belonged there. Ifeoma's father raised a glass to new beginnings and second chances. Everyone echoed the toast, their glasses clinging in unison. Kofi turned to Ifeoma and smiled. "It feels good to be home." Ifeoma squeezed his hand, her heart full. "This time, I'm never letting you go." A week after Ifeoma and Kofi had reconnected, they decided to celebrate their growing relationship by dining at an upscale restaurant. The evening was perfect, the soft glow of candlelight, the murmur of elegant conversation, and the tantalizing aroma of gourmet dishes. Ifeoma felt a warmth she hadn't experienced in years. Her laughter genuine as she shared stories with Kofi. Halfway through their meal, Ifeoma's smile froze as her gaze landed on a figure entering the restaurant. It was Kunle, dressed sharply. He seemed to be alone, scanning the room for a table. Before Ifeoma could look away, Kunle's eyes locked onto hers. His face darkened when he noticed Kofi sitting across from her. Without hesitation, he marched over to their table, his movements deliberate and tense. "Ifeoma," Kunle said, his tone sharp and accusatory. "So this is why you wanted a divorce so badly? To be with him?" Ifeoma's chest tightened, but she held her ground, meeting his glare. "You and I both know why the divorce happened, Kunle. It had nothing to do with Kofi and everything to do with the way you treated me." Kunle's face contorted with anger. "Don't try to twist things. You—" Kofi, who had been quietly observing the exchange, interjected, his voice calm but firm. "Kunle, you have no business being here or talking to her like this. Whatever you had with Ifeoma is over. Respect her and move on." Kunle glared at Kofi, but before he could retort, a waiter approached and politely asked him to leave their table, realizing he was causing a scene. Kunle muttered something under his breath and stormed out of the restaurant. Ifeoma let out a shaky breath, her hand trembling slightly. Kofi reached across the table and gently held her hand. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, her voice steady despite her emotions. "I am fine. Thank you for standing up for me." The following week, Kofi invited Ifeoma out to another restaurant, this time a more intimate venue overlooking the city lights. Ifeoma noticed he seemed a little nervous, fidgeting with his napkin and glancing at his watch. "What's on your mind?" she asked with a smile, trying to ease his nerves. Kofi chuckled softly. "You would see." As they enjoyed their meal, Kofi began talking about their past, how they had first met, the little moments that had brought them closer, and how much he had missed her during their years apart. Ifeoma listened intently, her heart swelling with emotion. As dessert arrived, Kofi stood and walked around the table. Ifeoma looked up, confused, until he knelt down on one knee. Her breath itched as he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a stunning diamond ring. "Ifeoma," Kofi began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "These past weeks with you have reminded me of how much I love you. I've loved you since the moment we met, and I've never stopped. You've been through so much, and I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Ifeoma's eyes as she covered her mouth with her hands. Overwhelmed by the moment, she nodded fervently before finally finding her voice. "Yes, yes, Kofi, I will marry you." The restaurant erupted in applause as Kofi slipped the ring into her finger. Ifeoma stood and hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. The rest of the evening felt like a dream. As they walked out of the restaurant, hand in hand, Ifeoma felt a sense of peace and joy she hadn't experienced in years. Kofi leaned in closer and whispered, "This is just the beginning, Ifeoma. I will never let anything or anyone hurt you again." Ifeoma smiled up at him, her heart full of hope for the future. Ifeoma couldn't wait to share the news with her parents. She walked into their home, practically glowing, and held out her finger with the ring sparkling on her finger. Her mother gasped, "Oh, Ifeoma, Kofi proposed?" "Yes, Mom," Ifeoma exclaimed. "We are getting married." Her father smiled warmly. "Kofi is a good man. I'm proud of you, Ifeoma." Ifeoma wasted no time and immediately called her best friend, Clara. "Clara," she said, her voice trembling with joy, "we have a wedding to plan." "What?" Tara screamed on the other end. "Kofi proposed? Oh my gosh, tell me everything." Ifeoma shared every detail of the proposal, and Clara promised to help her with every step of the way. A few days later, Ifeoma, her mother, and Clara visited an upscale boutique to shop for her wedding gown. Rows of shimmering white dresses surrounded them, and Ifeoma felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She tried on the first dress and stepped out to show them. Her mother tilted her head. "It's lovely, but I'm not sure it's the one." The second dress was better, but Clara shook her head. "It's nice, but we can do better." When Ifeoma stepped out in the third dress, both her mother and Tara gasped audibly. The gown hugged her perfectly, the intricate lace details shimmering under the light. A long, flowing trail completed the look, and Ifeoma felt like a queen. "This is it," her mother said, her eyes misting. Clara clapped her hands. "Ifeoma, you look breathtaking." Ifeoma turned to look at herself in the mirror, her heart swelling with emotion. "This is the one," she whispered. The day of the wedding arrived, and everything was perfect. The sun shone brightly as Ifeoma walked down the aisle in her stunning gown, her arm linked with her father's. Kofi stood at the altar, his eyes glistening as he watched her approach. The ceremony was emotional and heartfelt. When it was time to exchange vow, Kofi took out her hand and said, Ifeoma, I promise to love you, cherish you, and protect you for the rest of my life. Ifeoma's voice wavered as she responded, Kofi, you've brought joy and love back into my life. I promise to stand by your side always. After the exchange rings and the officiant proposed them, husbands and wife, they shared a kiss that drew cheers and applause from their family and friends. As the reception wound down and the guests began to leave, Ifeoma and Kofi shared one last dance in the now empty hall. The soft strings of a piano played in the background as Kofi held her close, his forehead resting gently against hers. I love you so much, Ifeoma, he whispered. Ifeoma smiled, her heart full. I love you too, Kofi, more than I can ever say. The night felt magical as they swayed together, the world around them fading away. It was a moment they would cherish forever. These are the moral lessons we can learn from this story. 1. The dangers of toxic relationships. Ifeoma's marriage to Kunle illustrates the devastating consequences of staying in a toxic relationship. It highlights the importance of recognizing the signs of abuse and seeking help. Secondly, family support and love. The story showcases the transformative power of family support and love. Ifeoma's parents, although initially misguided, ultimately provided safe haven and unconditional love, helping her heal and move forward. Lastly, the importance of true friendship. Clara's unwavering support and friendship plays a significant role in Ifeoma's healing process. The story highlights the value of nurturing meaningful relationships and having a support system during difficult times. Thank you for watching. Kindly like, subscribe, and share the stories with others. See you in the next video. Bye.